Okay, so this is Tuesday night, November 21st, and this is the fourth class on the Kanzeon Sutra chant, also known as the Extend Life 10 Phrase Kannon Sutra, or just the Kanzeon chant, because that's what it sounds like when you chant it. It goes Kanzeon a lot. First thing that we're going to do is actually do the chant itself. So I'm going to share the screen now, and there is the chant. I'm going to mute my
Juku Kannon
Kanzeon namu butsu yo butsu en bukpo so en joraku ga jojonen Kanzeon bonen Kanzeon nen jushinki nen furishin Kanzeon namu butsu yo butsu en bukpo so en joraku ga jojonen Kanzeon bonen Kanzeon nen jushinki nen furishin Kanzeon namu butsu yo butsu en bukpo so en joraku ga jojonen Kanzeon bonen Kanzeon nen jushinki nen furishin Kanzeon namu butsu yo butsu en bukpo so en joraku ga jojonen Kanzeon bonen Kanzeon nen jushinki nen furishin Kanzeon namu butsu yo butsu en bukpo so en joraku ga jojonen Kanzeon bonen Kanzeon nen jushinki nen furishin Kanzeon namu butsu yo butsu en bukpo so en joraku ga jojonen Kanzeon bonen Kanzeon nen jushinki nen furishin Kanzeon namu butsu yo butsu en bukpo so en joraku ga jojonen Kanzeon bonen Kanzeon nen jushinki nen furishin Kanzeon namu butsu yo butsu en bukpo so en joraku ga jojonen Kanzeon bonen Kanzeon nen jushinki nen furishin Kanzeon namu butsu yo butsu en bukpo so en joraku ga jojonen Kanzeon bonen Kanzeon nen jushinki nen furishin.
Okay, so I'm going to keep sharing the screen, but I'm going to put up, we'll come back to that at the end of the class. Let's see. Oh yeah, here we go. I'm just going to dive right in, and Elizabeth, if you have any questions at any time, you can just go ahead and shout out. And anybody who's watching this online, I can, let's see, yeah, since I'm, if you want to email me, you can put a comment. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can put a comment to ask a question, or you can email me at steinmetz.kurt@gmail.com. I'm not going to leave this up there, but just so that anybody who's watching this can see that. steinmetz.kurt@gmail.com. Any questions that you have, or maybe I say something that's not right, or that you think is not right, and let me know about that too. Okay, so this is the chant. We just recited this chant 9 times, and reciting it 9 times took about 3 minutes, which means you could do it 27 times in about 9 minutes, and which means you could do it 108 times in about 36 minutes. And then if you multiply that by 10, you come up to something like 1,000. And so one of the famous stories associated with this chant is that if you're ever facing execution, if you can do this chant 1,000 times the night before you're to be executed, they won't be able to kill you, which is always good. Let's see. Yeah. So this is the 4th class on the chant. We have covered the first. So that there's 10 phrases. That's part of the title of the chant, the Long Life 10 Phrase Kannon Sutra. So if you count the title, there's 11 lines. We've done the first 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we now have 4 lines left to do now in the last class, and these are the 4 lines that say chonen kanzeon, bonen kanzeon, nennen jushin ki, nennen furi shin. So cho and bo are morning and evening. Nen is the Japanese Sino-Japanese pronunciation of the word for mindfulness or mindful. Kanzeon is the name of the Bodhisattva. So morning mindful Kanzeon, evening mindful Kanzeon. Nennen jushin ki, mindful mindful. So ju is I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, but this is this ju, this character right here means follow. This is shin, which means mind, and this is ki, which means to arise from. Nennen furi shin, mindful, not separate from mind. Not fu, shin again, or ri, separate, and shin, mind. I think more or less what I just said is on the next slide as well. Yeah, it's just written bigger and with a little more detail. So cho, the character cho, on the first of these last 4 lines. This is actually the in Chinese, when you refer to dynasties, cho is the word for dynasty. So a dynasty is considered to be the beginning or the morning or the start of a new era. And so cho has all those connotations. So that the Dang Cho was the Tang dynasty, famous in Chinese history. Bo is so chonen Kanzeon, bonen Kanzeon. Bo means sunset, nightfall, end, late. So bo, I can't remember how to pronounce this character, but this is the character for year. So this is just a way of saying, the end years or declining years or old age. And there's the Chinese are big on four character idioms, and a well-known 4-character idiom in Chinese is morning bell, evening drum, using these 2 characters for morning and evening. And this is basically morning bell, evening drum refers to the sounds that come out of Buddhist temples in the morning and the evening. And usually in the morning and the evening, they're in both the morning and in the evening, they're ringing bells and hitting drums. But this one just says morning bell, evening drum. This is the Chinese equivalent of early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. If you follow the same kind of strict discipline schedule as the monks and the nuns in the temple, then you will be successful in life. All right, so that's those two lines. The last two lines, nen fudi shin, nen fudi shin, nen jushin ki, nen fudi shin, right? Nen jushin ki, nen fudi shin. So nen, we're going to talk about this some more. A really common thing that you see in the Chinese language is just repeating a character for emphasis. So sometimes a character that's repeated just emphasizes it. Sometimes there's a little bit more to it than that, and this might be one of those cases. We're going to look at that. But at the very least, this means like attention, or concentration, or mindfulness, emphasizing mindfulness. And then this character, Ju, means to follow, mind, arise. So what the most important character here is this last character, which means something is arising, something is now possible, something is happening, something is starting, because of nen, because of this intense concentration. It follows that the mind, something is happening, and we don't have to, figure out what it is, or we can kind of imply from context. But in the last line, it says nen fu. So this is nen jushin ki, nen fu ri shin, and this is actually more straightforward in what it literally means. Basically, this is saying that thought after thought, whatever it is that the mind is concentrated on, the mind is never separate from that concentration, not separate mind. And this is we'll get to it in a minute, but this is an interesting phrase, even outside of the realm of Buddhism. Nen fudi shin. Let's see. Anything else interesting here? No. Yeah. But obviously very important in this section of the chant is this character, meaning nen. It shows up 6 times. And of course, it's one of the most conspicuous and ubiquitous words that gets thrown around among Western Buddhists, mindfulness. And it gets used so much by, and I don't want to cast aspersions on anyone, but Oprah talks about mindfulness. Everybody talks about mindfulness. It's entered into popular culture. Many people who know little or nothing about Buddhism or meditation have heard of mindfulness. It's actually it's more out there and more well known than Zen. Zen used to be the word that everybody knew but didn't know what it was, and now it's mindfulness. Okay, so but it's actually a very ancient Buddhist concept. It's not some new age self-help blah blah that has been invented recently. It's an ancient a Buddhist practice and concept that to some extent has been maybe a little taken over, hijacked maybe, but that's probably a little too strong. But let's look at, so this is from the good old DDB, the Digital Dictionary of Buddhism, and you can look up Chinese characters there and get a good reliable information on what the original Sanskrit was. In this case, they don't give the Pali, so I put this in. That's why it's in square brackets. So that the original Sanskrit was Smrti, something like that. If I knew, I don't know how to pronounce Sanskrit, but and 2 common English translations for this character, which again, this is pronounced in Japanese, it's pronounced nen. In Korean, in Sino-Korean, it's pronounced something like yum or nium, and we'll see examples of that in a little bit. But in English, you can say that it means memory or recollection. So, the basic meaning here is given as mindfulness, but it definitely has a connotation or implication of it should bring to mind memory or recollecting. So you're mindful of something, but you're bringing something to mind, and in order to bring something to mind, it has to have been there previously. So you're remembering, you're recollecting, you're bringing the mind back to something that you want to focus the mind on. So some other ways of saying that is to recall, to remember, that which is remembered, the function of remembering, the operation of the mind not forgetting an object. That's a pretty interesting way of putting it. The operation of the mind not forgetting an object. So when you recall or remember something, that only happens after you've forgotten it, right? So if you have to bring it back, that means you've lost it at least for a minute. And if you recall in the chant, at first we have nen, right? But then we have nen. And what nen implies is that there's some continuity, that you're now, getting to a state of being able to actually hold something in the mind, that you are accomplishing the operation of the mind, not forgetting an object. Awareness, concentration, mindfulness, and we're going to talk about mindfulness of the Buddha. Not so much as in Pure Land practice, but that's what people often think of when they think of mindfulness of the Buddha, particularly of Amitabha Buddha, and then some stuff about Abhidharma Kosha theory, whatever that is. Let's see. So some other ways of describing it: settled recollection, to ascertain one's thoughts, to think within one's mind. That is, which is a strange way of putting it, right? To think within your mind. Well, that means without expressing it. So it's staying within the mind, and so it's a thought that's being held inside. Actually, one of the best ways of losing a thought is to start talking about it. If you hold it in and stop and resist the urge to yak about it, you're actually better able to hold whatever it is that you're trying to hold in your mind. To contemplate, meditative wisdom, mind, or just mind and consciousness. So nen is actually sometimes just thought of as thought or the mind itself, or consciousness. A thought moment is another way of talking about nen. And that again is also related to this progression when we go from just nen to nen. And this has the connotation that thought moment after thought moment, you're maintaining your concentration. Okay, so one of the people who's most responsible for popularizing the term mindfulness in English is Thich Nhat Hanh. And what many people often don't realize is that when Thich Nhat Hanh talked about mindfulness, he was talking about something that wasn't just some self-help relaxation technique. It was a very profound, very deep teaching from Buddhism. And this is one of the reasons why people don't always see that, is because he has such a wonderful and simple way of putting things. A person who practices mindfulness can see things. He's talking about eating a tangerine. This is one of his favorite ways of describing mindfulness, is to eat a tangerine mindfully. A person who practices mindfulness can see things in the tangerine that others are unable to see. An aware person can see the tangerine tree, the tangerine blossom in the spring, the sunlight and rain that nourish the tangerine. Looking deeply, one can see 10,000 things that have made the tangerine possible. Looking at a tangerine, a person who practices awareness can see all the wonders of the universe and how all things interact with one another. And so this is actually the Buddha. This is Thich Nhat Hanh putting into his own words, but what the Buddha described. Actually, the morning that he attained enlightenment. The path that I have found is the path of living each hour of the day in awareness, mind and body, always dwelling in the present moment. And again, another phrase that has entered into popular discourse in the English language, dwelling in the present moment. But here it goes a lot further than I think many people often think of when they just think of being in the moment. All right. Now, just to kind of emphasize how serious and how old, and how basic and fundamental this whole concept of mindfulness is in Buddhism, I want to just briefly look at this 5th century book by a guy named Buddhaghosa, who's one of my favorite Buddhist authors. This is called The Path of Purification. So this is basically the big book of Theravada Buddhist practice and thought, The Path of Purification. Here's a link to it. You can click on it, get the whole PDF. It's about 5 or 6 or 800 pages. I don't know. It's I also have it in the printed version. But here is from fairly early on in the book, Buddhaghosa talks about, he asks a simple question: what is concentration? That's a good question. And concentration is obviously very closely related to mindfulness. Concentration, the profitable unification of the mind. And that's a very carefully chosen set of words there. The profitable unification of mind. So why say profitable? Well, snipers have great powers of concentration. Ninja assassins have great powers of concentration. Con artists have great powers of concentration. Pickpockets have great powers of concentration. And I don't mean to cast any aspersions on people, who are snipers or ninja assassins or con artists or pickpockets. But I will say that, those are somewhat questionable activities from the standpoint of Buddhist ethics, and just from anybody's idea of ethics. You might be able to consider, maybe there are times when snipers and assassins and pickpockets and con artists, one of my favorite movies, or actually I've got more than one favorite movie about con artists. There's some great movies about con artists. But generally that isn't the type of livelihood that is thought to be conducive to practice. Okay, but those are all activities that require concentration. And so the profitable unification of mind, means that you not only have this skill or this ability, but that you have some intention behind it that is grounded in the teachings of the Buddha. Okay, and so it's also sometimes rendered one-pointedness in the sense of focusing, of a searchlight, like focusing a searchlight, which I think is a very nice image of what it means to focus the mind. Okay, so a little bit more detail. So this is different kinds of concentration. So one of the, going all the way back to the time of the Buddha, a very standard practice in Buddhism is to take up something that you're going to focus your mind on. And we're going to talk about that more. In fact, well, that's a lot of what this chant, the Kanzeon chant, and this is especially emphasized here at the end of it, it's focusing the mind on Kanzeon. And so the very first so this is let's see, okay. Mindfulness, sati, itself is recollection, anusati, because it arises again and again, or alternatively, the mindfulness, sati, that is proper, anurupa, and I'm not completely familiar with the subtleties of these different Pali terms, but the mindfulness that is proper for a clansman gone forth, that is a follower of the teachings of the Buddha, out of faith, since it occurs only in those instances where it should occur, is recollection. In other words, this is kind of the generic, I think probably the most important part of this set of words here from Buddhaghosa is that it arises again and again. It is the kind of concentration that is profitable, like saying up here, that is that it's grounded in the teachings, the ethical teachings of the Buddha. And which is kind of emphasized again by saying it occurs only in those instances where it should occur, like not when you're concentrating on, how to rob a bank or something. That also takes great concentration to be a successful bank robber. But that's not what we're talking about here. Only where it should occur, where it's appropriate. Okay. All right. So then there are 10 traditional focuses for concentration, or objects of concentration. The first one being recollection of the Buddha. Second one being recollection of the Dhamma. Third one being recollection of the Sangha. So that's the 3 jewels right there. The fourth is recollection of virtue. The fifth is recollection of generosity. The sixth is recollection of deities. And then, so usually the first 6 of these recollections are the ones that are most emphasized. They're the ones that are the most emphasized in this book, The Path to Purification, and a lot of traditional Buddhist teachings. The very next one, though, is recollection of death. Then the recollection of the body. Recollection of breathing. So this is mindfulness of breathing. This is the kind of mindfulness that is quite possibly the most popular among Western practitioners of Buddhism. And then the final recollection is recollection of peace. And this is particularly calling to mind the stillness of all suffering. So, Buddhaghosa, this is so, if you see here now, this first quote is from page 81. This is from more than 100 pages later. Buddhaghosa has quite a bit to say about different kinds of concentration, different kinds of recollection, and what's, you can actually use this book as a kind of meditation practice instead of just kind of skipping over things and saying, yeah, I got that, to actually read closely and carefully what he's saying and to think about it. It's quite good. Let's see, what's next? Okay, right. Now, one of the things that is often overlooked in Zen is that koan practice is a recollection, is a concentration, is a mindfulness practice. And it is a mindfulness practice where the student is given something to direct the mind to. It's almost invariably is not explained in that way because, of course, nothing is ever really explained in Zen. But sometimes it is. So this is a great quote that I really like from the Blue Cliff Record, case number 8. When the ancients let down a hook, it is never an empty maneuver. They invariably have some truth to benefit people. And just to make this a little bit more concrete about what I'm talking about, if you work on a koan like Mu, and one of the reasons why the koan Mu is so both important and also considered a very good koan as a relatively a beginner koan, not beginner because it's easy, but beginner because it's fundamental, is because in Mu it's actually pretty straightforward what the koan is about. The koan Mu is about Buddha nature, and very in the Mumonkan, not the Blue Cliff Record, but the Gateless Gate, the Mumonkan is generally considered to be, although this is not really true, but it's kind of true, and the Mumonkan is often considered to be a little bit easier than the gate. So the Gateless Gate is often considered to be a little bit easier than the Blue Cliff Record. The second koan in the Gateless Gate is the good old Fox koan, and the Fox koan, once again, is pretty straightforward to see what it's about. It's about karma, and that's right in the in the story of the koan itself. So the first koan Mu is about Buddha nature. The second koan, the Fox koan, is about karma, and this is true for there are koans that are about bodhicitta. There are koans that are about emptiness. Usually, Zen teachers will not come out and say that. In fact, they'll often say, you can find people who will say, oh, the Mu koan is not about Buddha nature, or the Fox koan is not about karma, or this koan is not about that, whatever. And anyway, that's just Zen talk. The important thing being that all of this previous talk that I gave about, these various recollection practices, or mindfulness practices, this is absolutely the same kind of practice as what Zen people do when they're doing koan practice. It's bringing something to mind. All right. So, yes. So mindfulness, Nyan, is this, in addition to being a very fundamental Buddhist concept, Nyan, which is kind of the pronunciation in modern Mandarin, is just a normal word that is used in everyday speech or writing in Mandarin. And so this is from a website aimed at people who are just learning, modern Mandarin, who may not have any interest in Buddhism whatsoever. Maybe have no interest whatsoever. Although, actually, if you're going to learn Chinese, you'd better have some interest in Buddhism. You better have some interest in Confucianism. You'd better have some interest in Chinese culture in general, because there's a lot of it that's actually embedded in the language. But nevertheless, so in modern Chinese, Nian or Nen or Niom, depending upon which accent or country your pronunciation is trying to approximate, to read, to study, to attend school, to read aloud, and even to to give a tongue lashing. Now, here's a very interesting one to miss. So when you miss somebody, you are very mindful of them. I mean, missing someone or missing something is one of the most intense forms of concentration and mindfulness that there is. This character is also used in Chinese. They have ways of usually the numbers in Chinese are often very simple, but when you want to make sure that someone doesn't come and add some strokes to your check that you just wrote so that you're paying 20,000 yen instead of 2,000 or whatever. So this is also used as a for the number 20. Now, so this is from purpleculture.net, which is actually a very good website for getting information on Chinese characters. You can find the same thing on some other websites, but I want to get to this phrase. This is the very last line of the chant. Mindful, not separate mind, is actually found in modern Mandarin to describe the intense and even obsessive nature of romantic love. And so these pictures here are from romance novels in modern Mandarin, written by a pretty successful author named Wu Yun Ranran. And she has one of her romance novels is titled this. This is the title of a romance novel. And I don't think I have the copy for that one. But and I forget, the publisher provides like a rough English translation. I forget what the English translation of this is, but something like, you are never out of my mind. Basically, that's the title, which makes perfect sense. It's the same essential meaning as what we have when we do the chant, but it also makes perfect sense as the title for a romance novel. Other novels that she's written are I Like the Way You Like Me, Love is Cute and Will Last Forever. And they probably sound a little less goofy in Chinese, maybe, because they are, after all, romance novels. And these are some links to her books. Let's see. Okay, so this is probably a good place to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and finish up. I've got some more to say about, this character, this very important character, and other characters as well. Okay, so let's take a break now. I'm gonna get out of the. Okay, where were we? I think we were right here. Yep, this is it. Okay, so you can see the screen, Elizabeth, and hear me okay? Okay, good. Thank you. And go back into slideshow mode. So I keep referring to the character as a Chinese character, which it is. But of course, this chant, and we're going to talk more about this is in the second half of the class. The chant is primarily known to people now around the world as coming from Japan, and so sometimes people think of it as a Japanese chant. In fact, it's all in Chinese. It's just people usually learn the Japanese pronunciation of the Chinese characters, which is the pronunciation that we're using in this class. But this character, just like I said, just like I pointed out before the break, Nian, or however it's pronounced in Mandarin, is a normal word in everyday modern Chinese. Nen is also a normal word in everyday modern Japanese. In fact, of the 2,500 most used kanji is the Japanese a word for what? Let's see. I should. Yeah, it's a little better. Okay. Kanji is the Japanese word for Chinese character, and kanji are heavily used in writing the Japanese language. But of the 2,500 most used kanji in Japanese newspapers, nen is number 390. So it's if you learn Japanese, you're going to have to learn this character. And here are two examples in modern Japanese of words that contain this kanji. One is just a word that means commemoration or memory. It's pronounced kinen. And the other is gin nen, which means regret or disappointment. And so these two, jlptsensei.com is a good site if you're interested in learning Japanese. And nihongo-net.com is another good site for learning Japanese. In addition to being present in the Japanese language, the hanja is the Korean word for Chinese characters. There are in ordinary everyday Korean, modern Korean, there are a number of words that contain this character, pronounced either yum or nyum, including so this is the word for concept. So if you look up, it's pronounced ge nyum in Korean, something like that. But if you look up ge nyum, write it out in Korean, and you'll see pictures like this, the bright ideas. If you look up, let's see, which one is this? This is yum ryo, where the character for mindfulness is at the beginning of the word. This is the kind of picture you'll get. This means to worry about something. So this is a very intense kind of mindfulness. Worrying about things is, again, this is one of the reasons why it was very important for Buddhaghosa to point out a profitable concentration of the mind. Worrying about things, the mind is very concentrated. It's not very profitable though, right? Oh yeah, and then this is a ginyum, which means to commemorate. This is actually North Korean postage stamps commemorating. I don't want to say anything to get in trouble with the North Koreans, but I just thought it was interesting to include some North Korean, because this is one of the things that you'll see if you do a Google search on ginyum, which means to commemorate something, which is another form of, commemoration literally means to bring something back to mind. You're commemorating something. Anyway, so this is in addition to, when you learn this chant, there's some very interesting and important Buddhist concepts that are learned, but you're also learning about the culture that brought the cultures that we are indebted to for making Buddhism available to us. All right, so one of the things that has been talked about previously is, and it's actually very much related to this ending section of the chant. This chant is a way of cultivating bodhicitta, the mind that seeks enlightenment in order to benefit all sentient beings, and so and it's worth. And so what's going on, like I said, is that when you get to the end of the chant, you're looking at the transition from nen to nen, where the mind is actually starting to actually become concentrated, not just trying to concentrate. So nen is basically trying to concentrate, and nen is when the mind is becoming profitably unified on bodhicitta. And so, again, you shouldn't use this chant in order to improve your powers of concentration so that you can become a better day trader or whatever. And again, I've got nothing against day traders, which is a kind of con artist, I think, but you're trying to figure out, anyway, I probably shouldn't say that, but to profitably concentrate the mind, unify the mind, it should be, you have to begin with the intention. And I was referring previously in kind of very general terms to, Buddhist ethics or, the teachings of the Buddha. Really, bodhicitta, the aspiration to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings, is for Mahayana Buddhism, what, the motivation is, the starting point. And so I'm breaking bodhicitta down into relative bodhicitta and absolute bodhicitta, which is something that you'll sometimes encounter. Often you'll also find relative bodhicitta broken down into aspiration bodhicitta and application bodhicitta. And so this is important because aspiration bodhicitta is always where you have to start. Aspiration bodhicitta is the nen part, is the trying to concentrate, the trying to practice. And it corresponds to the thought that you should practice. I should practice in order to become enlightened and save all beings. That is a very, very basic, straightforward, very un-Zen way of expressing aspiration bodhicitta. And this is, if you go back to the previous discussion in some of the previous classes, where Hakuin actually makes it quite clear that this is very, very relevant to the reason why Hakuin strongly encouraged people to do this chant a lot, was because he felt it was a very good way of cultivating bodhicitta. And so to go from I should practice to actually practicing, actually getting on the cushion, and once on the cushion, reminding oneself of your correct motivation. Once on the cushion, staying on the cushion. Once on the cushion, when the mind wanders, to come back to your practice. And then at the end of practice, to dedicate your practice to your original intention, dedicating your practice to the benefit of all beings. These are all application bodhicitta. And if you when we listen to the recording and chant it along with the recording at the beginning of this class, which we'll do at the very end of the class, that's a group of people doing the chant together. It's very clear from the way Hakuin approached this chant. And also I'm going to talk in a little bit about Zen Master Sheng Yen, a very great modern day Chinese Zen teacher. This is something that you can do as part of your personal practice. you can do it as a mantra when you're sitting. My grand teacher Zen Master Sung San, and also my teacher Zen Master Degak, have made mantra practice a part of the way that sitting meditation is taught and practiced, and especially it's usually presented that, well, mantra practice is good for people who have difficulty in meditation. But guess what? Everybody has difficulty in meditation. If you think you aren't having difficulty in meditation, you're not doing it right. Anyway, so this is relative bodhicitta. This is all bodhicitta where you have some idea of what you're doing, some idea that you are doing something, some a thing that you are trying to do in order to accomplish something. That's why it's called relative bodhicitta. Absolute bodhicitta is where there's no I, no Buddhas, no sentient beings, and no practice. Okay, and that's actually included in this chant as well. The line Jo Raku Gajo. That's absolute bodhicitta, and it's interesting that absolute part of the chant is in the middle. It's not at the end. It's in the middle. It's kind of it's almost like the meat of the sandwich of this chant. And so that's important. It's not like you're going to get to absolute bodhicitta and then you're done, or you don't need relative bodhicitta anymore. Okay, so this is let's see. This is this is a quote from the Vimalakirti Sutra. The Vimalakirti Sutra actually has quite a bit to say about relative and absolute bodhicitta. It doesn't use those terms exactly, but it comes pretty close. And so here, I believe this is, I can't remember if this is Vimalakirti or Shakyamuni Buddha who's speaking, but it says, what is meant by saying that the Bodhisattva does not dwell in the unconditioned? So the unconditioned, that's Jo Raku Gajo, okay? What is meant by saying that the Bodhisattva does not dwell in the unconditioned? It means that one studies and practices the teachings on emptiness, but does not take emptiness to be enlightenment. One studies and practices the teachings on non-form and non-action, but does not take non-form and non-action to be enlightenment. One studies and practices the teachings on non-arousal, but does not take non-arousal to be enlightenment. One views things as impermanent, but does not neglect to cultivate the roots of goodness. One views the world as marked by suffering, but does not hate to be born and die in it. One sees that there is no permanent ego, but is tireless in instructing others. And so, on the one hand, I could say you get the point. It's actually very good to read through this whole thing, and read through actually the entire Vimalakirti Sutra. But the point here is the inseparability of relative and absolute bodhicitta. Seeing through the teachings, seeing through practice, seeing through the Buddha, seeing through suffering, doesn't mean that you're done and you don't need to practice anymore, because you probably don't see through them as much as you might think you do. Speaking of relative and absolute bodhicitta, now this breaks it down even more. And this is from a nice book by the Dalai Lama and Thupten Chodron on samsara, nirvana, and Buddha nature. Covers a lot of ground. And one of the things that they make clear in this passage is how you cultivate bodhicitta. And let's see if I can kind of pluck out let's see how much time we got left. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but let's spend a little bit of time on it. So the Hakuin, in his teaching on the Kanzeon chant, emphasized how this chant is a way of practicing what he called the inexhaustible lamp. And the inexhaustible lamp is a phrase that comes right out of the Vimalakirti Sutra. The inexhaustible lamp is the application of bodhicitta. And how does that work? Well, let's look at this. Oh, and this is actually very good here at the very beginning. As part of our practice of training in bodhicitta, upon awakening each morning, we generate contrived bodhicitta. Contrived bodhicitta is aspiration bodhicitta. It is saying, I should practice. That's contrived bodhicitta. That's the very beginning. And it's actually, you can't practice without first having the idea, I should practice. It's very easy to get all Zen or all non-dual or all, whatever about it. Say, oh, the idea I should practice. There's I, there's should, there's practice, Well, yeah. Once you get on the cushion, you can start trying to get rid of I and should and practice. But until you're on the cushion, you have to have I should practice. So today I will do all actions with the aspiration to attain full awakening to benefit all sentient beings. And it's, when we recite the 4 great vows, this is what we're saying, but this actually puts it in a little bit more normal language. Today I will do all actions with the aspiration to attain full awakening to benefit all beings. Now, if you remember that quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, where he was paraphrasing the Buddha's teaching, the morning that he had attained enlightenment, he said, what did he say? The path I have found is the path of living every hour of the day in awareness, mind and body, always dwelling in the present moment. And very importantly, that's also connected with the person who practices awareness can see all the wonders of the universe and how all things interact with one another. There's complete inseparability of all beings, which is another way of putting bodhicitta. If you see all beings as inseparable, then you no longer have attachment to self. You no longer attachment to you. You only want to alleviate the suffering of others. Anyway, okay. So today I will do all actions with the aspiration to attain full awakening to benefit all sentient beings. Today I will be just like the Buddha was on the day that he attained enlightenment. This is the causal motivation for all of our actions that day. However, we often forget. Okay, yeah, I knew there was going to be a however in here, right? We often forget our altruistic intention, and the immediate motivation for many of our actions is attachment, animosity, jealousy, and so on. In this case, the immediate motivation determines and then it gets into more. This is a really nice book. It does get a little, detailed. It does get down on the, talks about if, in our actions, what part of our motivation determines the ethical value of our actions. And if your motivation is non-virtuous, then, the ethical value will not be virtuous. Nevertheless, we generate bodhicitta in the morning. It's worthwhile because it lessens the strength of our destructive actions and reminds us to purify afterwards. In addition, it plants seeds in our mind stream so that one day we will have uncontrived, spontaneous bodhicitta. One day, we won't have to have this, today I will do all my actions, We'll actually do that, okay? Sometimes the force of our compassionate motivation in the morning stays with us during the day, transforming many of our actions into virtue. High bodhisattvas, causal and immediate motivations for all actions are the same. High bodhisattvas. This is the concept of high bodhisattvas who don't have to have contrived bodhicitta versus me and other not so high bodhisattvas. This is a concept that's very relevant if you read the Vimalakirti Sutra, which I am reading right now. A lot of the bodhisattvas that are portrayed in the Vimalakirti Sutra, like Vimalakirti himself, are these high bodhisattvas, but it's important to know that it takes some doing to get to that point. Okay, so bodhisattvas on the path of accumulation and preparation, that's basically anyone who is not yet a high bodhisattva, are born in samsara owing to ignorance. And so what this is going through is saying that if you still have to say, I need to practice and get on the cushion and have contrite bodhicitta and try to remind yourself, if you maybe you have nen sometimes, continuous concentration, but you have more maybe nen than nen. There is a progression. By the force of their fervent, compassionate intentions. And remember how the very last line of the of this chant also makes a perfectly reasonable title for a romance novel. because of this aspect of the fervent, compassionate intention, and stainless altruistic prayers, which is not necessarily something that fits necessarily into a romance novel. But anyway, yeah. And so in some of this might sound a little familiar, in part because it's coming from the Dalai Lama, but earlier in the earlier class on the Heart Sutra, the Dalai Lama also talked about the path of seeing versus, which is a more advanced state for a bodhisattva, versus the path of accumulation and preparation. He talked about these in relationship to the Heart Sutra in particular and the Heart Sutra mantra, and in the Heart Sutra in general and the Heart Sutra mantra in particular. And he kind of broke down actually the syllables of the Heart Sutra mantra, and that's on a slide. And I'm not going to go back and try to find it, but yeah, this progression of developing bodhicitta and of progressing along the path to Buddhahood, which is the Bodhisattva path, is found in the Heart Sutra mantra in a very condensed form, and it's also in this particular chant in a slightly less condensed form, a little bit more explicit, but still very condensed. Let's see. Yeah, so this is all good, but I'm going to move on. Okay, so probably the last thing that I'll be able to talk about tonight is the way that this chant has moved around over time. Now there was in earlier classes when we were talking about this chant, we referred to and actually, if you go back to these slides 22 through 25, there are a lot of slides that referred to this wonderful book by on Kuan-yin, the Chinese Transformation of Avalokitesvara. And of course, I can't remember the author's name now, but it's Chinese. It's in English, but she used her Chinese name in the book. The point being that this very short chant, the 10 phrase chant, is related to a somewhat longer chant. It's considerably longer than the 10 phrase Kannon Sutra, but still not that long compared to like a whole, like the Heart Sutra, or I mean the Lotus Sutra or something. But it's really not clear what that relationship is. Some people think that the shorter chant came first, and that the longer chant was an elaboration on the shorter chant. Other people think it was the other way around, that the longer chant came first, and the 10 phrase chant is a condensed abbreviation summary form. Whatever. What happened was that in China, over here in green, in China, the long version, what is now thought of as or referred to as the High King Avalokitesvara chant, the longer version continued on. So people are still doing that chant, and it's still quite widespread and has remained popular in China. But the short version died out. But before it completely died out in China, somehow it got transmitted to Japan. And so the shorter 10 phrase chant continued on in Japan even after it had died out in China. And that's interesting because you know, a lot of the chants that I'm most familiar with, like the Heart Sutra, like the Great Dharani, you can think of the four great vows that we recite. When we recite the four great vows, it's actually something that is essentially a chant. The Om Mani Padme Hum, the disaster averting Dharani, which a lot of people don't know it by that name, but it's part of Kwanzaa Bosal chanting and Jijang Bosal chanting in the Korean tradition. It's also very, very popular in Japanese Buddhist tradition. The second book that D.T. Suzuki published in English on Zen Buddhism contains his English translation of the disaster averting Dharani. If you go to any Japanese Buddhist temple, they will recite this Dharani every day. But anyway, so these are some of the chants that I'm most familiar with, and it's easy to forget that, or it's easy to overlook the fact that Buddhists, like everybody else, they have fads and things become popular and then they don't. You know, like nobody has coral colored or avocado green, you know, things in their kitchen anymore, although that was popular. People don't have shag carpeting anymore. Buddhism has a lot of things like that that come and go, that come into style and go out of style. But the 10 phrase chant is an example of a chant that was popular one time in China and then it died out. It moved to Japan, where it just, and we don't really know when I'm trying to do some research on this, but I cannot find out when it became popular or even known in Japan, but it is definitely very popular there now. But Taiwan is down here for a reason, because in more recent times, the 10 phrase chant has been reintroduced to Chinese Buddhism, specifically in Taiwan, by Zen Master Sheng Yen. And Zen Master Sheng Yen was a bit of a world traveler. As a young Buddhist in Taiwan, he was somewhat of a troublemaker, and was associated with the modernizing, modernization or whatever movements in Taiwan. You know, asking questions like, well, why do we do it this way? You know, and maybe we should do it differently. Maybe we should modernize. Maybe we should be more democratic. Maybe we should be more egalitarian. Maybe we should, you know, not be so old-fashioned. But even though from my perspective, when I look at Sheng Yen and his teaching, it seems very traditional. But what he actually did was quite innovative, and the way that he taught was quite. And so for a long time, it was kind of resisted in Taiwan. And he said, fine. he went to New York. I mean, he got a PhD studying Buddhist literature in Japan, and then went to New York, and he traveled around quite a bit. But eventually he became a very, very, very well-established and revered teacher in Taiwan as well. And part of his teaching that he brought to Taiwan was influenced by his experiences among Japanese Buddhists. And he thought he liked this 10 phrase chant that he discovered in Japan, and he immediately recognized that it is a Chinese chant, and he did some research on the history, and reintroduced it. Oh yeah. So this quote down here is just a little example of the way that fads come and go in Chinese Buddhism. One of Sheng Yen's, one of the people who most influenced Sheng Yen was a guy named Tai Shu. And one of Tai Shu's life, missions was to reinvigorate the practices associated with Maitreya, which never really took off. Anyway, so this slide it kind of gives a little bit more about what Sheng Yen had to say about the 10 phrase Avalokitesvara Sutra for Prolonging Life, which is the English translation of the title that he uses. And he explained it as one of many practices, which of course it is, associated with Avalokitesvara. And he put it basically in a general category of dharanis and mantras that are associated with Avalokitesvara, which some people will say, wait a minute, that's not a dharani and it's not a mantra. You know, some people are get a little bit too fixated on technical definition. You say it over and over again, basically a mantra. Let's see. Yeah, this is more on. Okay, so I've got a couple slides on what Master Sheng Yen had to say. One thing in particular that he had to say about the 10 phrase Kannon Sutra, or Avalokitesvara Sutra, is that it's very good for people who have difficulty in meditation. So difficulty in sitting meditation. If you try to sit and you experience difficulty, you should recite. You should sit and repeat the Kanzeon Sutra over and over again. And actually, even if you don't have difficulty in meditation, in my opinion, it's a good thing to repeat over and over again. And then just finally, this little chant is actually an excellent starting point for anybody who's interested in Chinese characters, learning them. You can learn how to write them, or you can just learn, start learning the characters, recognizing them. This shows, this is a breakdown of all the characters in the chant by how many times, by how many strokes they have. So there's one character that has 2 strokes, 2 characters have 4 strokes, 2 characters have 5 strokes, 3 characters have 6 strokes, on down. And of course, Guan or Kan of Kanzeon in the Japanese pronunciation has 24 strokes. But anyway, all the characters here in green are also in the Heart Sutra. If you take the class that I teach online on the Heart Sutra, I include some extra characters as well, and those are the three of the characters in the Kanzeon chant are included in the class, even though they're not in the Heart Sutra itself. And then this over here is the entire chant, and all the characters that have less than 10 strokes are highlighted in blue. So it's actually a pretty good. Eventually, I'm going to do a class teaching Chinese characters using this chant. This is just some more motivation for that. The gu, this was pointed out earlier in this class, but in the title, when we say Enmei Juku Kannon Gyo, the ku or gu is the same as the gu in Shinmyo Jang Gu De Dharani. And so it's, and it has the same meaning, it means phrase. So the 10 phrase, Juku means 10 phrase. And anyway, I've run out of time. So we should do the chant one more time. Do you have anything that you wanted to ask or say, Elizabeth? I've been talking kind of fast and a lot.
Yes, I noticed from my notes on from a Medicine Buddha teaching on the different levels of consciousness. There's the eye consciousness, the nose, but I thought this was interesting. It's that the 6th consciousness, the mental consciousness, unlike the other 5, relies on the previous moment of consciousness. The other consciousnesses take supposedly the information that's right now, but the 6th consciousness, the mental consciousness, relies on the previous moment of consciousness. So I thought that was interesting, and that that this mental consciousness is what generates all experience of faith feelings and compassion feelings, emotional states and thoughts connected with them, which then influence all the sense perceptions. So that rang a bell with the nen and then the nen.
That's
like
right.
the
Yeah, nen.
previous
Right.
moment of consciousness.
Yeah. And so whenever you see that, then that comes up a lot. A lot of Buddhist teachers like to stick that in different places. You know, that every moment, every thought moment, every moment of mental consciousness depends upon the previous moment, which I think is true. But one of the reasons why teachers like to point that out is because it's also one of the standard Buddhist proofs for rebirth, because no mental state can ever come from nothing. So when you are born, your mind has to have come from somewhere. It can't have come from nothing, because if you trace back, if you and this is a meditation practice that people can do, where you just say, where did my current mental state come from? You look at the previous, and then you say, where did that come from? And then you basically ask yourself, does it make sense that any of these mental states could have come from nothing? Anyway. So whenever a teacher is saying that, they're trying to convince you to believe in reincarnation. It's always kind of embedded in there.
Good to know.
Good to know, yeah. But yeah, that's a very good point. It's very relevant to this, I think. Let's see. Okay, so now we should, unless you had any other interesting things pop up from the Medicine Buddha or anywhere else. Let's see, what am I looking at? Okay, good. I can find, there it is. Yeah, but I lost it. I'm gonna stop sharing for just a second. Oh, I'm not sharing right now, am I? Good. Am I sharing right now? You can't see my screen, can you? No, okay. I don't know when I stopped sharing. Hopefully it wasn't too. Let's see. Okay, so now I'm going to. There it is. Okay, I got it.
Enmejuku Kannon
Kanzeon namu butsu yo butsu en bukpo so en joraku ga jojo nen kanzeon bonen kanzeon nen chushin ki nen furishin kanzeon namu butsu yo butsu en bukpo so en joraku ga jojo nen kanzeon bonen kanzeon nen chushin ki nen furishin kanzeon namu butsu yo butsu en bukpo so en joraku ga jojo nen kanzeon bonen kanzeon nen chushin ki nen furishin kanzeon namu butsu yo en bukpo so en joraku ga jojo nen kanzeon bonen kanzeon nen chushin
Bye, Elizabeth. And bye to anyone else who's watching this. Thanks for
Bye.
watching.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming. Bye-bye.